All right, well, the Cummins swap is done. Let's get right into it. So my previous swap cost me around $15,000. I did a lot of extra stuff that I didn't really need to do, and I learned a lot from it. In this swap, we cut a few corners, but we made it really nice. So we ended up finding this engine for $600. It was a rusted out first gen non-intercooled engine that had been sitting for years. The guy that I had bought it from said the injection pump had gone bad, but the engine was in good shape. If you're looking for a motor to do the swap, you're gonna be in the like 3,000 to 5,000 range. So I thought that getting this for $600, even though it needed to be rebuilt, was a good deal. I took the block to the machine shop, they overbored it to 20 over, hot tanked it, cleaned it, and then machined the deck of the block to make sure there was no warping or twisting. I also got all the other parts for the engine washed in their hot tank. In one of the previous videos, you saw me inspecting the old head that came on this first gen, and it had a few cracks in the injector ports. I've read on the forums that you can run the cracked head and it'll be fine, but I didn't want to play around with it. I was doing a fresh rebuild, so I just wanted to have everything brand new. So I found a new head for $1,100. Now there's some asterisks when you're buying a new head. This head was a later model head, so it only had the 7mm injection ports. The injectors with this engine were the 9mm injector nozzles, so they didn't fit with this head. So that meant I had to get new injectors, which ended up being around $385. Luckily, all the other fittings for your coolant, temp sensors, all that boost stuff fit right in, so it did work well, and I didn't have any issues with that. I ended up going with the 215 horse injectors that had been retrofitted for the first gens, so you get a little bit more horsepower than compared to the original ones that were in it. When I was at the machine shop, they had mentioned that they had a remanufactured injection pump from Cummins for $800, and I thought that was a pretty darn good deal. So I ended up going back and buying that injection pump from them. I didn't know for sure that the old injection pump was bad, but I thought, again, when I'm rebuilding this thing, why take a chance on an old injection pump? One thing to note when you're buying a first gen VE pump setup is that there are different injector lines and different sizes. So the delivery valves are a different size and you can swap them out, but the non-intercooled pumps allegedly make a little bit more power than the intercooled version, so I considered that a plus. Luckily, all of my non-intercooled injection lines lined right up with this non-intercooled pump and everything worked. This block didn't come with a turbo, so I ended up driving down 2 hours from where I'm at in Idaho and picking up an HX35, and everything on the turbo worked great, but some of the threads were bad on the backside where it would bolt into the exhaust that I have. I tried tapping and rethreading them and it just didn't work, so I ended up finding another HX35 another 2 hours away from me, and that one worked perfect. All the bolt holes lined up for the exhaust, so that's another $400. The HX35 is a great turbo. It's a great budget turbo, and it obviously came stock on the later second gens, and I haven't had any compatibility issues with it yet. It also sounds awesome with the silencer ring removed. I drove up to Dynamite Diesel here in Idaho and purchased a 3,200 RPM governor spring, which I installed, and that helps you not defuel as you get into higher RPMs and provide better drivability. The injection pump came remanufactured perfect with stock settings, so I don't want to mess with it too much, but I will be tuning it in an upcoming video. If you're planning on revving this engine past 3,200 RPM, you do need to get 65-pound valve springs. I did that on my last one. Not interested in doing that for this one. These engines are meant to be at like 1,800 to 2,800 RPM. They're low slugging engines. They've got a lot of torque down low. And with the NV4500, you just switch gears when you need to. For rebuilding the engine, I went with a door slammer kit from Power Driven Diesel. It ended up being around $1,250, and they allow you to select all of your different options. Mine obviously was overboard 20 for the piston rings. Comes with brand new pistons themselves, a full lower and upper gasket seal kit. So all of your valve covers, timing covers, oil pan gasket, all of the above. It comes with all that. It also came with a new oil cooler, and then you can select your rod and main bearings. I did have the crankshaft machined on this because there was a little bit of pitting on the journals of the crankshaft, so that ended up costing another $250. In this kit, they recommend purchasing the killer dowel pin fix, and of course I did that. That is a catastrophic failure point on these engines, but I took care of that so I don't have to worry about it. Next is all the stuff I got from rockauto.com. I bought all my stuff from Rock Auto in the last build and didn't have any issues with all the accessories, so I did the same on this one. I spent about $1,150 at Rock Auto, and that's including lift pump, power steering pump, alternator, AC compressor, a starter from a 6.7 motor as they're a little bit smaller and fit in this swap around the transmission tunnel a little bit better than the stock one. A new water pump, flywheel, and clutch kit. I'd considered studding this block, but it doesn't really need it. I'm not running more than 20 to 30 pounds of boost max. So I did some research on Power Driven Diesel's head bolts, found that $200 was a good price, and they just bolt right in. You can reuse them, which I wouldn't recommend, but they have held up so far. I need to do a hot retorque now that I've got the engine running, but I torqued them to 130 foot-pounds, and we should be good. One thing to think about when you've had the deck machined like I did is you need to check for your piston protrusion, which I already did. Those are in previous videos you can go check out, but you need to make sure that you have the right head gasket thickness. I went with a standard one and haven't had any issues. Next is a bunch of stuff I got between Amazon and eBay, including a billet tappet cover for $60, one of the lifting brackets for the head which didn't come with the block for $45, the intercooler elbow for the HX35 which was $40 on eBay, an oil feed line for the vacuum pump which was $40, the vacuum pump itself, which was $100, a fuel filter plug. I had some issues finding one of these, and there's a water and fuel sensor on some of these trucks, and there's a port in the fuel filters that has threads for this sensor, so I ended up just putting the sensor in there and obviously not connecting it because I don't need it. A fuel filter itself for $30, a custom power steering hose that goes from the Toyota steering box to the Dodge steering pump, some flare adapter fittings for $20, and then Evil Energy was nice enough to send me out a catch can setup, which you would just use a downdraft tube coming from the tappet cover in order to vent your crankcase, but I needed to use AN fittings because of the tappet cover. Now we can get into the custom parts that you'd need for this specific swap. From powertrainintegration.com or Dustin, who I've used his kit before, I got custom motor mounts for the Cummins to the landcruiser chassis for $260. I got the adapter plate with all the hardware, which makes the Toyota transfer case to the NV4500 for $840. There's a steering box spacer for $35, which is necessary to clear the timing case. I also purchased the body lift kit from Powertrain Integration for $180. It's not 100% necessary, but it just made installing the engine so much easier. He also sells the brass adapter fittings that go into the head of the Cummins for your Toyota sensors for $65, and then a kit that relocates your steering brace so that you can clear the oil pan for $35. Powertrain Integration is currently working on a new accessory bracket which will be available soon, but I ended up going with the Jonesy's B-Series high mount bracket, which costs $650. It includes all the hardware needed, the pulleys and the belts, as well as the thermostat and the water inlet pipe. I purchased new motor mounts from cruiseroutfitters.com. These are the rubber portion of the motor mount that goes in between the custom mounts on the block and the frame. You can purchase OEM ones, but they're pretty expensive, and I used the Cruiser Outfitter ones in my last swap and they worked great. Now let's talk about the intercooler and piping setup. Last time I paid $1,650 from powertrainintegration.com. This time I tried fabricating my own, and I'm actually pretty happy with the result. It was a lot less expensive, not as clean though. I found an intercooler on Amazon for $130. I found the piping on eBay for $136. I needed to roll the beads so that the boots would seal properly and not have any boost leaks, so I purchased one of those for $50. I purchased kind of a chintzy intake elbow for $40 on eBay, but I'm pretty happy with it so far. Mine was a non-intercooled Cummins, so it came with the intake going right to the turbo, so I needed one that was facing 180 degrees out. And then I ended up purchasing some hump hoses for around $40 so that the intercooler piping had a little bit of play when the engine would shake from left to right. The lines for the cooling system were pretty cheap. I deleted my rear heater, which I definitely recommend you do. I spent around $100 on various 5/8 heater hose for your heater valve area, a new heater valve, and then a bunch of 1.5-inch coolant hoses. Now for the transmission. I found an NV4500 on Marketplace for around $800. It was known to be good, but it was a two-wheel drive transmission. With this kit that comes with a custom main shaft that's been machined down to 19 splines, it fits right into the Toyota transfer case, but that does mean that the transmission needs to be rebuilt with the new main shaft. I did the same thing on my last one, and Dustin from Powertrain Integration was the one who rebuilt it for me. So new bearings, synchros, all the good stuff. I exchanged that $800 transmission as a core and paid $1,250 for it to be rebuilt. So we're in around $2,000 for the transmission. After rebuilding the transmission, you'll also need the four-wheel drive or shorter tailstock for this swap. I'm currently using a clutch pedal with no return spring from a Tacoma. I cut it up a little bit, drilled some holes for it, and I'm making it work with the clutch master cylinder. The clutch master cylinder cost me about $130. The Tacoma clutch pedal I found on eBay for $150. I did source an actual left-hand drive manual clutch pedal for a Land Cruiser, which will bolt right in. Still going to be a little bit of fabrication required, but the amount of throw is better for this swap and the NV4500 master and slave cylinder, so I'll be installing that in a later video. I definitely prefer this style of clutch master cylinder because it already includes the plate with the two bolts that go into the firewall. On the Dodges, there's a custom plate that you actually turn and lock in the master cylinder in, and sometimes it came loose when I was on the highway, then I didn't have any way of switching gears, so definitely prefer this style. I also bought a threaded shifter yoke, which if you've watched any of the recent videos, caused some issues because there was bad machining and it may have well just bent one of my shift forks. I have to dig into that as I no longer have the ability to get out of fifth gear once I've gotten into it. It's kind of scary. To finish it all off, I purchased a full exhaust system that bolts into the HX35 and the stock mounts for the FZJ80. It's mandrel bent and 3-inch all the way back with a muffler and comes out on the side. Next we have the fluids. I always go with MT85 gear oil from Redline for this NV4500. I like Redline stuff, and most of the guys I talk to run Redline, so that's what I went with. That was around $100 for 6 quarts. Then obviously we have 1540 diesel oil, spent about $40 on that. 1 quart of automatic transmission fluid for the power steering pump and box, $40 on coolant. And then this cost is gonna vary a lot on what type of tools you have, but I just said $300 to $500 for consumables, welding wire, flap discs, grinding discs, consumables in general, hardware, that kind of stuff. Specialty tools you'll need for this, you'll definitely need a welder, a transmission jack, an H-press, a nice tool set, some wiring tools to reconfigure your wiring harness, an angle grinder, a hole saw, and a sawzall. I haven't actually added this up yet, so I'll put the amount right here for all the costs associated with this swap. And again, hopefully this came out a little bit less than the last time. I learned a lot from the last swap, but there's so many ways you could do this swap. So many different amounts of power and fuel you could give it. It really depends on the type of setup you want. I may be doing a couple of these engine conversions for some people that have reached out on YouTube in the near future. But if anybody has any questions, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and we'll see you in the next one.